So on a Sunday morning, I got a guy coming in to haul the cattle away. And these four big animals that I got here, the two big black ones and the gray one and that red heifer right there, about tomorrow or so, maybe the day after tomorrow, I'll be taking them to the lease property so that they can all go on the load together. And so, okay, I figured this is something. It's a good time to look at this because I feel like maybe it'll make more sense. Maybe or whatever it may be. It's a good time to look at it. Okay, so if I sell 20 animals, right, and I got 47 animals, right, and I spent like under $700 on my entire business in like the last 40 days, right? So think about it. Okay, so and I've already said that, when I sell the animals, I will make enough money to buy everything. Okay, I will make enough money to buy more animals. I can actually expand my balance sheet. I can buy all the fertilizer that I need. I can buy all the grain that I need. My business pays for itself and it actually grows, right? My business is actually on an upward trajectory. My business, if I just reinvest the money that I make in my cattle business actually grows exponentially, okay? I actually compound growth. And so let's take a look at it. What do I mean? And I've been saying this, so when I sell these 20 cattle, I will probably make enough money to buy 30 cattle, 2 loads of grain, a load of fertilizer, and I will still have a couple $1,000s left over. And I also still have 27 animals, right? And I've been talking about this for a couple of days, but I have legitimately zero death loss. I expanded the size of my herd by about 40-50%. I actually increased my revenue by about 30-40%. I brought them in a little bit heavy. And I had zero death loss. All right? And I legitimately spent like $0 on my business. I actually reduced the amount of money that I'm spending on my business, investing in my business. And when I liquidate these animals, I will have enough money to buy more animals, and I will have enough money to buy all the grain that I need and all the fertilizer that I need, right? Makes a lot of sense, right? I brought them in small, and I'll be selling them at about 700 pounds, all right? I brought them in at about maybe 250, 3.25, and I'll be selling them at 700, right? So I more than doubled their weight. And so, I have commercial animals and et cetera, right? And so, I have commercial animals. They're all doing good. And, I'm effectively just good to go. All right. And so I take a look at the whole situation. And, okay. So, when I liquidate 20 out of my 47 animals, right, when I bring home that check, that is not all of the money that my business makes. All right. This is very important to understand. I'm actually in the net positive on all of my animals. All right, all of my animals are in the net positive. If I sell 20 out of my 47 animals and I bring home a check, that's not all the money that I make. Okay, I didn't even liquidate half of my assets, right? All right, I still have the other 27 animals, and the other 27 animals have gone up in value, right? Let's just take a look at it. I mean, the other 27 animals have gone up in value. And so, okay, and to put a realistic perspective on things, and I've already, and I said another way to look at this in terms of a very realistic way, a very realistic, just a sensible way to look at things, is that if you think about it in terms of cattle or assets and not money, okay, think about it in terms of cattle. I will more or less be able to double the size of my balance sheet over the next 3 months by just reinvesting my earnings and maybe taking a little bit of debt. That's, okay. And even if I don't use any debt, if I legitimately use zero debt, I will still be able to increase the size of my business by about maybe 80% in the next 2.5 months. All right, when I liquidate my animals and I just reinvest the money, I buy them small and I sell them big. It's not some incredibly difficult thing to understand, right? I buy them small and I sell them big. I raise them to a commercial standard and I raise commercial grade animals, right? This is not some horribly difficult thing to understand. And so when I sell, okay, and so, when I sell my 20 animals, right, I still have 27 animals left over, right? then you know, that's not all the money that my business makes, right? And in terms of a realistic sense, and I've always said, you know, okay, you know, let's use my balance sheet as an example. Like, let's say that you have a balance sheet, right? And you have assets on your balance sheet, and you have reasonably appraised your assets, right? You've taken a look at your balance sheet and you have reasonably appraised your assets, and you understand what your assets are worth, and you're not having some delusional fantasy, right? Like, you actually understand, right? You've taken a hard look at it. You've actually taken a look at it, and you've actually appraised your balance sheet, and you have determined that your balance sheet is in the net positive. Like me right now, I have determined my balance sheet is in the net positive. Okay, I actually managed to reduce my expenses, and I increased my earnings by about 30 to 40%. So I increased my earnings by 30 to 40%. I reduced my expenses. I had, you know, legitimately, I had zero death loss in the last month and a half, and I brought home 15 new animals. All right, I did exceptionally well, okay? I am actually outperforming myself by a long shot, all right? And I take a look at it, and I say, well, I have some positive equity on my whatever, on my herd or whatever, you know, and, you know, there are, you know, you can, okay. So if I sell 20 animals, right? If I sell 20 out of my 47 animals and I bring home that check, that is not all of the money that my business makes, okay? My herd, the 27 animals that I still have at home, have an appraisal value. All right, they are still worth, you know, an equitable sum, right? And so I take a look at it, and long story short, I mean, okay, you know, as of today, you know, if I was legitimately going, like, you know, if I had a reason to whatever, you know, as of today, okay, well, actually, you know, the way that I'll put it is that when I take a look at it for what it is, okay, when I take a look at it for what it is, how much money do I bring home on a monthly basis, and what does my balance sheet look like, and what do I reasonably believe that the appraisal value of my balance sheet is, and the appreciation value of my balance sheet is. As of today, I make somewhere around I bring home about $30,000 to $35,000 a month on a 10 and a half, or not on, I guess 51 acres, okay? I farm cattle on about 51 acres. But on my lease property, I only have 15 animals on that lease property because of the water situation, all right? So, you know, I effectively bring home about $30,000 to $35,000 a month. And here's the big kicker. I will actually be doubling my income over the next 2.5 months. I may actually even do, okay, and I've been saying that, you know, I've been taking a look at it, and I was like, I actually think that my income is going to end close to $1 million a year, right? I've actually been saying this, but I may actually exceed that. I am actually now taking a look at it, and I may actually outperform myself. My income may go over $1 million a year, substantially more. All right, because here's the thing. It's like, you know, if I just, okay, so let's just, okay. And just consider this. Imagine what if everything just goes okay. Imagine what if everything just goes okay. Things don't go horribly wrong, but things don't go horribly well. I more or less just do this for 2.5 months. All right, what's gonna happen, right? And I don't use any debt. Let's just take debt out of the equation. I don't use any debt. Let's just say everything goes okay. For 2.5 months, things just go okay. You know, I've taken a look at my herd, and I've already told you that I believe that these animals are stabilized, right? These animals are stabilized. I gave them multiple rounds of BRD vaccinations. I gave them multiple rounds of Covaxinate. You know, I preconditioned them all by myself. You know, I have them on a very, 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 you know, meticulous, I'm very meticulous about the things that I do, right? When you take a look at it, and you take a look at it for what it is, I effectively have some of the best results known to mankind. All right, it doesn't matter what we're talking about. We could be talking about cattle. We could be talking about growing grass. We could be talking about running a business. All right, I legitimately have some of the best results known to mankind. I legitimately outperformed the entire planet, farming in my backyard. All right, I started myself a commercial cattle business in my backyard, and I effectively outperformed the entire planet. All right, chances are my cattle do better than, you know, just about any other, you know, and then, you know, I legitimately outperformed the entire planet. All right, and, you know, and I will talk to you about, you know, what does money look like for me? All right, because, you know, this wasn't some easy thing. And at the end of the day, nobody cares about an opinion, okay? If you have an opinion, what's actually going to happen if you have a bunch of opinions and you don't have anything to show for it, is that you're actually going to have to, one day, you're going to have to step up to the plate, and you're actually going to have to, prove your worth, right? And at that point, it's like, imagine if you legitimately think that you can do this, then go and do it. All right, because in real life, you know what's actually going to happen is, like, if you were put on a field with me, I would effectively eat the entire planet alive. It wouldn't even get close. Okay, you know, I have some of the best results known to mankind. Legitimately, okay? If we're talking about business, my business makes more money than effectively any business on the entire planet. Just about, okay? Like 99.999% of them, okay? You know, if we're talking about growing grass, I effectively grow grass better than 99.9999999, you know, maybe even 1 in like 10 billion. You know, I effectively grow grass better than anybody on the entire planet, effectively. All right, you know, when it comes to, you know, running cattle, I effectively run cattle better than anybody on the entire planet. I actually exceed the commercial standard. All right, you know, having a death loss of 3 to 4%, you know, putting on like over 3 pounds a day, you know, borderline 3 pounds, maybe even a little bit more than that a day on an animal is very good. It is absurdly good. And the fact that I managed to do it on a backyard by myself, right, you know, with about $1,000 a month is incredible. All right, it is borderline unheard of. Actually, it is unheard of until I did it. And just to put things in perspective, I actually don't know anybody even doing 10%. Most people cannot make $2,500 a month on a 10.5 acre field. Most people can't. All right, and you know, and I understand that I have a lease property, right? But you need to understand that I also only have 15 cattle on that lease property, all right? And I only have 15 cattle on that lease property, and as of right now, I'm making about $35,000 a month take-home pay, all right? And I would actually anticipate that over the next 2.5 months, I will double the size of my balance sheet. I will legitimately be doubling my income in the next 2.5 months. All right, you know, and why do I see that happening? Because imagine, what if everything just goes okay? Right, things don't go horribly well, or things don't go horribly wrong, but things also don't go incredibly well. Things just go okay, right? I just continue to do this for 2.5 months, and more or less, you know, I don't go and do something ridiculous like you know, whatever, right? You know, and just imagine that things go okay. And I've already said that I understand that I'm making a lot of money. I understand, okay? You know, I've taken a look at it, and I make a drastic amount of money, all right? And so I'm taking a look at it, and I've already determined what am I going to do with the money, all right? Budgeting, right? I guess what you call budgeting. I have already determined what I will do with the money, and I have given myself a reasonable reason for why I will do that. And I'm not going to be miserable doing it. And, you know, because here's the thing. It's like, for me to legitimately spend a reason, okay, because I've always said that when it comes to spending money, you have to think about it in terms of a reasonable perspective. Like, you have to take a look at the person and determine how much money they, you know, how much, okay, and in terms of, you know, I guess don't look at, you know, whatever, you know, it's what, you know, you should look at yourself and determine how much money you make. Write it, you know, if you need to, write it down on a piece of paper. And then think about what you're going to do with your dollars, right? And if you're spending more than you make, that's not good, right? I mean, raise your income, do something, lower the amount of money you're spending, right? I mean, it's very simple. And I've always said this, money is not complicated, all right? It's just a number, all right? You know, and if you're not good with numbers like I am, just understand that you have calculators. You can pull out your phone and you have a calculator on your phone. All right, money is not difficult. Money is not difficult, okay? You know, it is not difficult. It's just a number. And if you cannot understand numbers, and if you do not know how to add or subtract, then type it out on a calculator, all right? Money is not difficult. All right, so I've taken a look at my situation, and I have determined, I understand that I am making a drastic amount of money. I make more money as a cattleman than effectively anybody makes on the entire planet doing anything. Legitimately. And here's another, you know, and you know, what am I going to do with this money? Because okay, for me to spend the amount of money that I make in the cattle business, if I was going to go and spend, you know, if I was going to take the money that I make in the cattle business and just buy Lamborghinis with it, if I were just going to buy Lamborghinis with this money, I would effectively have to buy 3 to 4 Lamborghinis a year. And when you think about that, that is unreasonable. Why would I do that, right? I mean, if I had, you know, $500 million, then sure, I would go and buy 3 or 4 Lamborghinis. But I'm not gonna go and buy myself 3 or 4 Lamborghinis because I make $1 million a year, right? I mean, that's ridiculous. Why would I do that, right? I'm not gonna go and buy myself 3 Lamborghinis because I make $500,000 a year. Why would I do that, right? I mean, it's unreasonable, right? What is something reasonable that I can do making about $500,000 to $1 million a year? What is something reasonable that I can do with that money? I sat there and I thought about it. And what I can do is grow my business. All right, I'm not going to go and, that's the most reasonable thing to do, right? It is to grow my business. And to put things in perspective, let's not talk about money. Let's talk about it in terms of cattle. What does that look like? Right now, I have 47 animals, and I effectively liquidate about 20 animals every about a month and a half, 2 months, okay? And when it will take me about 2.5 months to liquidate about 40 of my animals. They will hit market weight, and then I will be able to liquidate about 40 of my animals. And when I liquidate these 40 animals, I will effectively make enough money to buy maybe about 70 animals, 3 or 4 loads of grain, and probably a load or 2 of fertilizer. All right, I'll be able to buy everything. My business pays for itself, right? I talk about this all the time. My business pays for itself. Farming does not cost me any money. And it's farming, it pays for itself, and it produces me a massive profit. If I stopped farming, I would hemorrhage money. All right, so let's take a look at it for what it is. All right, let's take a look at it for what it is. Let's not talk about it in terms of money. Let's talk about it in terms of cattle. Let's talk about it in terms of assets. Over the next 2.5 months, I would anticipate that I liquidate 40 animals. And when I liquidate these 40 animals, I will make enough money to buy 70. I will still have enough money to buy 3 or 4 loads of grain and probably 1 or 2 loads of fertilizer. And I will still have, probably a couple $1,000s left over. And here's the thing. If I am liquid, okay, so if I have 47 animals right now, and let's say I increase the size of my balance sheet to 80 animals, right? Let's just not say I'm going to liquidate 40. Let's say I'm going to liquidate all 47. And I increase my balance sheet to 80 animals. I will effectively be liquidating like 20 animals. All right, I will effectively be liquidating somewhere around 15 animals a month. And if I liquidate 15 animals a month, I still have 65 animals left over, right? Those 60, that I will effectively be doubling my income. I would still have 65 animals left over. If I double the size of my balance sheet, right now I have 47 animals, and I am liquidating animals about, I'm liquidating a set of animals about every month and a half, 2 months, right? And when I liquidate my animals, I still have more than half of my animals left. Within about 2.5 months, when I double, and I've already determined that this is what I will do because it is the most reasonable thing to do. Okay, because the thing about making about $500,000 to $1 million a year, all right, and I may actually go over $1 million a year this year. I'm actually taking a look at it right now. And I don't want to get too far ahead of myself because I still got 7 months to go. All right, I still got 8 months to go, and a lot of things can happen in 7 or 8 months. I got to keep my feet underneath me, right? I got to stay about it. And if I do well, if I work on my business and I do well, and I keep my head in it, and I continue to perform, I may at that point, if I continue to do that, I would actually anticipate that my income goes over $1 million a year. All right, it would go over $1 million a year, and it might be substantially more. All right. When I take a look at it right now, I'm effectively getting paid once every about month and a half, once every 2 months. All right, and when I liquidate my animals, I'm not liquidating all of my animals, right? I talk about how I run my balance sheet, right? I don't liquidate all of my animals. I liquidate a portion of my animals. I keep a portion of my animals, and the portion of my animals that I keep, I effectively have determined that they are in the net positive and they are appreciating in value, right? They are the stabilized herd, and they will provide a safety buffer for me having to risk money to bring in new animals, right? That's how I run my balance sheet. And so I take a look at it, and it is what it is. And at the end of the day, it's not an opinion. Money's not an opinion, okay? Money's not an opinion. It's not. Opinions aren't going to do anything for you. Opinions don't mean anything, okay? I actually do this stuff in real life, all right? I actually do this stuff in real life, and you have to understand that, well, I mean, it is, and this sounds horrible and whatever, but I'm not saying it to be a malicious person. But do you think that, okay, does it sound like a reasonable thing? Oh my God, why would I stop running my business? Because, it's like, opinions don't matter, okay? I actually do this stuff in real life. I actually have the results, and I actually show you how to do it, right? And I show you how I do it. All right, I do this stuff in real life. It's not an opinion. I don't make this up. Like, my cattle are not fake. My grass is not fake. My business is not fake. All right, I'm not some poser. All right, I'm not like sitting there going, oh my God, well, I fell out of heaven to seven and my life's a magical journey and I was born with the answer, right? I actually do this stuff in real life. All right, and I got the guy coming in next week to pick up my cattle. He'll be picking up 19 animals. All right, he'll be picking up 19 animals. And when he picks up my 19 animals, I will still have 28 animals left over. All right, and those 19 animals that are going to market, they're going to hit the scale at about 700 pounds on the whole set of them. All combined, they'll hit the scale at about 700, maybe a little bit more. And I brought those animals in at about 3 1/4, 250, 3 1/4. So I will just about have more than doubled to tripled their weight. And I did it for very, very, very low cost. All right, I didn't need, I spent under like $700 on my entire business in the last 40 days. All right, I legitimately had like zero death loss. Well, I mean, not like zero. I had zero death loss in the last month and a half, and I increased the size of my business by 30 to 40%. All right, it just is what it is. I mean, it's not an opinion. I mean, I don't, and at the end of the day, why would I care? I mean, and I know this sounds horrible and whatever, but, it's like, I make so much money in the cattle business, I can do anything. Do you think I'm going to, why would I care? I legitimately make so much money in the cattle business. I actually make more money as a cattleman than anybody on the planet makes doing anything. And it's substantially more. Because think about it like this. Imagine that things go okay. And I've already determined that, this is what I will do with the money. And imagine that things just go okay, right? And imagine that I do end up with 80 animals. I have 47 animals right now. And I liquidate the animals and I'm able to buy 80 animals, right? Let's just imagine that things go okay. Things don't go horribly wrong and things don't go exceptionally well. Let's just imagine that things go okay. And so I do end up with 80 animals, right? And let's say that I have 80 animals and I'm liquidating, let's say 15 animals a month. When I liquidate 15 animals, I will still have 65 animals, right? I will still have 65 animals and I'll be getting paid again the next month. If I legitimately felt like spending, if I legitimately felt like spending $10,000 a week, I would actually make all of the money back and then some. All of it. That's another way to look, because if I have 65 animals and I'm liquidating 15 animals, I'm liquidating 15 animals a month, and I still have 65 animals left when I liquidate my 15 animals, right? If I sold 15 animals and then I just said, you know what, I'm just gonna go and spend this money. I've just decided that I'm gonna go and spend this money. Okay, and just a very realistic way to put it. Because I would still, I would at that point, the unrealized gain value of my 65 animals would effectively be double what it is right now, right? I mean, effectively double, all right? Because 65 animals will go up in value faster than 27, okay? So think about it, all right? So, if I just felt like spending the money and I just said, you know what, I have 80 animals and, let's just say that I paid for the animals and, I didn't use any debt and I just grew my business, right? I didn't use any debt and I just grew my business, which I don't do, right? I use debt. Because of tax benefits. But, let's just imagine. Let's just imagine that I reinvest my earnings and I grow the size of my herd and I do manage to buy 80 animals, right? And I have 80 animals and I'm sitting there with 80 animals and zero debt. So I take a look at my herd and I say, well, these 65 animals have gone up in value and they're, probably worth about 80 or 85 animals. I'm probably in the net positive 20, 25 animals, right? So I take a look at it and I say, well, I have appreciated the value of my herd. I have no debt on my animals. I just reinvested my earnings and I managed to grow my business. So I'm sitting there with zero debt, selling 15 cattle a month. And I take a look at it and I take a look at my balance sheet, and my balance sheet, I say, well, I have 65 animals, but my 65 animals have gone up in value and they're maybe worth about 80, maybe worth about 85. If I spent $10,000 a week And this is also what I mean by after a certain point, the money does not do anything. I've taken a look at it and I understand that it is what it is. And that, and I have determined that this is what I will do with the money. All right, this is what I will do with the money. Because if I spent $10,000 a week, by the time I spent the money, I would have made it all back and then some. My business would still continue to grow. I would, it's not possible to spend that amount of money. All right, not reasonably with this income. All right, because at about $500,000, once you start bringing home about $500,000, $1 million a year. And here's the thing, but me, I actually, the way that I make this money is I start my own cattle businesses. All right, I farm to do it. I can effectively start my own farm whenever I want. I can effectively just pay myself as much money as I ever need. After a certain point, the money doesn't even do anything. And this is a very realistic way to look at it. Imagine that things just go okay for the next 2.5 months. All right, just imagine that things go okay for the next 2.5 months. Things don't go incredibly well, but things don't go incredibly bad. Things just go okay. In this situation, I will legitimately be able to expand the size of my balance sheet to about 80 animals. But just by reinvesting my earnings, just my earnings. So let's say I expand the size of my herd to 80 animals, right? And I'm liquidating 15 animals a month. And when I liquidate those 15 animals, I still have 65 animals left. And I take a look at my 65 animals and I appraise those animals and I determine, well, these 65 animals are probably worth about 80 animals, probably worth about 85 animals, and I don't have any debt. So let me take a loan for 65 animals, right? That puts me at, just the number of animals that I have, that would put me at 130 animals. I could still, and I wouldn't even be in the negative on my balance sheet. And another way to look at this is that if I legitimately spent $10,000 a week, by the time I spent that money, I would have made it all back and then some. It's I make a ridiculous amount of money in the cattle business. And I try not to talk about the monetary, not that I don't try to talk about the monetary. I look to give you as many perspectives on it as I can. All right, I don't talk about it in terms of just money because because here's the thing. If farming was easy, everybody would do it. All right, and and I've already told you, if you want to go and run, I'll probably end up running somewhere around 250 and 400 cattle this year by myself, right? I probably will, okay? I probably will end up running about 250, 400 cattle a year by myself. And if you want to go and you want to run 250 cattle a year, nobody's stopping you. It's a free country. You can do whatever you want. And when you're watching me farm, it's like watching I am effectively one of the most capable farmers on the entire planet. All right, if you think that this is easy, you are in for the time of your life. All right, legitimately, being able to do this took a long time and it took a massive amount of effort. And at the end of the day, if you are legitimately in a situation where you think that this looks easy and that you can do, then go and do it. I don't know anybody even doing 10%. I don't even know anybody doing 10%. I effectively outperformed the entire planet doing anything. You could legitimately do anything on the entire planet, and I probably make more money as a cattle farmer I do make more money as a cattle farmer than anybody on the entire planet doing anything. All right, this is not some, and at the end of the day, I'm the one who actually makes the money. Why? And and if you're legitimately, if you cannot understand, even when you're looking right at it, I don't know what else to tell you. That's not good, okay? Have fun dying poor. All right, legitimately, I have some of the best results in the world. When it comes to money, I have some of the best results in the world. When it comes to cattle, I have some of the best results in the world. When it comes to growing grass, I have some of the best results in the world. All right, how many times do you, at what point, at what other point in your life do you think you'll get to, see somebody? And I talk about this because there are so many people who, if you go on anywhere, you can go on YouTube or whatever, whatever. And there are so many people failing all the time, all over the place. How many times do at what other point in your life do you think you will get to see somebody who is extremely successful financially? All right, extremely successful financially. And at the end of the day, I didn't sell my soul to the devil for money. I run beef cattle, okay? I feed people. If we did not, do I think that we are at the pinnacle of all achievement? No, I don't. If anything, I would like to encourage, and I've always said this, that like the one thing that we can always do forever is to effectively do better, right? We got to work on doing better, right? Work on doing better, improving something, right? Be a part of the solution, right? Take a look at the modern agriculture and improve it, right? Improve it, right? I mean, actually work on improving it, right? I work on improving things all the time. My cattle medication program, my soul fertility, my business, right? Reinvesting my earnings, doing better for myself. I work on these things. That's effectively the one thing that everybody can do all the time, and it will actually have a positive result. All right, I fell out of heaven at 7, and my life's a magical journey is not going to get you anything in life. It's not. At the end of the day, nobody cares about an opinion. I actually do this stuff in real life, and just in a very realistic way to look at this. And I'm being completely honest. Okay, let's, if everything just goes okay for the next 2.5 months, everything just goes okay. Things don't go incredibly well and things don't go incredibly bad. Things just go okay. I will be able to double the size of my balance sheet, just about. Double the size of my balance sheet over the next 2.5 months. And if I do that, it will turn into a situation where just by reinvesting my earnings, I could actually increase the number of animals that I have from 47 to 80 just by reinvesting my earnings. And I will be able to buy like 3 or 4 loads of grain, and I will be able to buy 2 or 3 loads of fertilizer. All right, just by reinvesting my earnings. And if I take a look at this situation, in that situation, even right now, if I went and I spent, I don't even know, like $15,000 a month, it wouldn't even do anything to my finances. Wouldn't do anything. I could effectively run my business sideways and spend $15,000 a month, and it would not do anything. I could run my business sideways. I could not grow my business and just scrape money off my business, and it would not do anything. I have already decided to reinvest my earnings. Okay, I've decided that is what I will do with the money. I am not going to scrape money off my business. All right, I'm not going to scrape money off my business because there's no reason to do that. And here's the thing. For me, okay, and I've actually been talking about this, the whole thing about spending, large sums of money is that it is not possible to do it unless you intentionally go out of your way to spend money. I would have to intentionally go out of my way to spend money. And, and at that point, what would I do with that? Would I go to the Gucci store? Why would I go to the Gucci store? Now, why would I go and buy myself 3 Lamborghinis a year? Why would I do that? I wouldn't do that. There's no reason to do that. It's not going to do anything. Right? And so, I'm taking a look at it. I understand that I am effectively taking a dump on the entire planet, running cattle in my backyard. I understand. Okay, I've actually come to the realization that it is happening. I will actually be selling animals next week. All right, I'll be selling animals. Well, not even next week. Technically, it's in 5 days, right? I'll be selling animals, I guess, in 5 days now. It's coming in real close. So I'll be selling animals. And I am making a drastic amount of money. If I spent $15,000 a month, it wouldn't even do anything. All right, and in all honesty, if everything just goes okay for the next 2.5 months, I would actually end up just about doubling the size of my business over the next 2.5 months. I will legitimately be able to double the size of my balance sheet, more or less double the size of my balance sheet by just reinvesting my earnings. And when that happens, I could legitimately spend $10,000 a week. And by the time I spent the money, I would have made it all back and then some. All right, and how do you spend that amount of money? You can't. Right? I mean, it's not possible. Not unless you go and do something horribly moronic. And also, here's the thing. Let's say that you have $500 million, right? Let's say that you have $500 million, and sure, you could spend $10,000 a week. It wouldn't matter. Am I going to go and spend $10,000 a week making $1 million a year? No, I'm not. Why would I do that? It's not going to do anything, right? I mean, sure, whatever, it's not, but at the end of the day, it's not a reasonable thing to do. What is a reasonable thing to do, right? Grow my business, all right? Grow the business, increase your equity portfolio, increase your returns. All right, and here's the thing. I've actually taken a look at it, and I may actually end up doing more than $1 million a year. All right, and I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but I may actually end up doing more than $1 million a year. All right, I legitimately might. My whole goal was to do $1 million a year by the end of the year, right? I was gonna look to make myself about $1 million a year at the end of the year, but I may actually even do better than that. I may legitimately end up outperforming myself. All right, I'm taking a look at it for what it is right now, and it might happen. All right, it might legitimately happen, and I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. I don't want to give myself bad juju, but I'm just saying that there is a possibility that it will happen. In the next 2.5 months, I will be able to increase my income by almost 200%. All right, I will legitimately be able to increase my income by about 200% in the next 2.5 months. And how will I do that? By reinvesting my earnings. All right, by reinvesting my earnings. That's how I will do it. I'm not going to go and, I understand that I am making a massive amount of money. I understand. I've taken a look at it, and I have come to the conclusion that I am making a massive amount of money. And, I've determined that, I'm not going to scrape any money off my business, because I just don't see any reason to do that. All right, there's no reason for me to do that. Why would I scrape money off my business? I will take the money that my business makes, and I will put it back into my business, and I will grow my business. And if everything just goes okay, if everything just goes relatively okay for the next 2.5 months, I will be able to double the size of my business, just about. That will put me in a situation where I am liquidating about 15 to 20 animals every month, and I would still have 65 animals left over. That's the situation that we're looking at. Within about 2.5 months, I would reasonably anticipate that happens. And then that will put me in a situation where I now have, that would, in that situation, if I legitimately just reinvest my earnings, don't use any debt, and just reinvest my earnings, and I grow the size of my business to that over the next 2.5 months, then, I could legitimately spend over $10,000 a week, and by the time I spent the money, I would have made it all back. And then some. I would have actually made more money than that. And this is, and at that point, but even as of now, even as of right now, the amount of money that I make in the cattle business is so high that I can't even spend the money. I've actually taken a look at it, and I have reasonably determined that I cannot even spend the money, borderline, even if I tried, I could not spend the money. So I have determined that I will put the money back into my business, and I will grow my business. All right, that is it is borderline. It is such a massive amount of money that I cannot spend it, even if I tried. Borderline, even if I tried. Granted that I didn't start doing drugs. Granted that I didn't start drinking all the time. Granted that I didn't start gambling. I legitimately cannot spend the money. I make so much money in the cattle business that it is a massive sum. All right, it is a massive sum. I actually make more money running cattle in my backyard than anybody on the entire planet makes doing anything. Just about. All right, I make a massive amount of money. And so I'm taking a look at it, and I have determined to just put the money back into my business. And will I do it? I guess we'll find out. I told you I will do it. I told you that this is the direction that I'm going. And I've already, I've already said, this is where I'm going. I'll be liquidating animals this weekend, and this is what I will do with the money. This is the direction that I'm going. And will I do it? I guess we'll find out. All right, we'll find out. We'll find out. Am I just going to go and start spending massive amounts of money for no reason? If I do, then we'll find out. But I've already said that this is what I'm doing, and this is why I'm going to do it. And I've already said that, the whole thing about this is that I'm not going to be miserable to do this. If I legitimately feel like spending money, I can just put it on my credit card and then just pay for it when I sell my cattle. All right. Because more or less I will be selling, right now I sell cattle about once every 2 months, and I sell about 20 of them every about month and a half, every 2 months. But within 2.5 months, if I just reinvest my earnings and grow my business, I will effectively be able to sell a lot of cattle every single month. And whenever I sell my cattle, I can just pay for my credit card. All right, it won't matter, okay? I can effectively buy whatever I want. I always remind myself of this, because it's like if I go to the store and I remind myself of this all the time, because it's like, me, I don't think, I legitimately like don't spend any money at all. And I'm like, maybe that's not really where I want to be. Maybe because even if I spend $1,000 a week, it wouldn't matter. Right? And so I tell myself, maybe I should just push myself to spend a little bit more money, because I legitimately invest everything that I make. And I legitimately don't buy myself anything. Right? I mean, I've legitimately had the same t-shirts for 2 or 3 years. I wear the same pants for like 2 or 3 years. I mean, I wear the same shoes for like 2 or 3 years. And I'm like, maybe that's not good. Maybe, and I've actually, I've actually already told myself this. I tell myself this all the time. Like, if I go to the store and I want to buy a t-shirt, I should just buy it. If I want to buy a pair of pants, I should just buy it. If I want to buy a pair of shoes, I should just buy it. Or whatever it may be, I should just buy it. Because it won't matter. It doesn't even matter. My business is still growing. I'm producing a massive profit. I mean, I do very well for myself. There's no reason why, and I'm, the whole thing is that I just don't spend money. I don't exactly know why, but I just don't spend money. I legitimately wore the same pair of pants for like 2 or 3 years. I mean, I wore the same t-shirts for like 2 or 3 years. I wore the same shoes for like 2 or 3 years. I just throw them in the laundry. And I tell myself, I should probably start spending a little bit more money. Just buy whatever I want, because at the end of the day, it won't even matter. All right, I'm being completely serious about it. If I spent $1,000 a week, it wouldn't even mean anything. My business would still grow. I wouldn't even be running my business sideways. And within 2.5 months, let's just say that I reinvest all of my earnings. Let's just say things go okay and I reinvest all of my earnings. If I spent $10,000 a week, by the time I spent the money, I would have made it all back and then some. All right, I am making a massive amount of money. I make more money as a cattleman than anybody on the planet makes doing anything. I would be willing to bet my income will actually end the year probably over $1 million a year. My whole goal was to do $1 million a year, right? That was my whole goal for the year, but I'm actually taking a look at it right now, and I may actually do more than that. All right, I may legitimately outperform myself. All right, and so, and the money, it's whatever, right? I mean, at the end of the day, even if I had nothing, I could redo it all in 3 seconds. That's the whole thing about money. Money is negligible. All right, and just to put things in perspective, this entire business cost me under $700 in the last month. In the last 40 days, I legitimately spent under $700 to run my entire business. Right? I mean, money is negligible. Actually knowing how to farm, or actually knowing how to do something, is far more important. All right, and nobody can just wake up one day and just magically, oh my God, I was born a farmer. You were not born a farmer, you were born average. And if you legitimately think that you were born a farmer, you actually probably went downhill. All right, you probably went below average, because now you're also an idiot. All right, you're going to have to work on it. Farming is not easy. I legitimately have some of the best results in the world. Some of the best results in the world. I outperformed the entire planet financially, just about, and it was on a massive scale. All right, it was on a massive scale. I wouldn't be surprised if I make more than 350 times the annual, in terms of the amount of money that I generate. I would not be surprised if it's over 350 times the median income. I would not be surprised. I would not be surprised. And just to put things in perspective, okay, let's take the whole idea of $10,000 a week. If you divided that by 350, what would that be? I don't even know. What would that? I don't even know. But if you took that amount of money, most people can't even spend that amount of money every week. In terms of an individual, most people can't. All right, let's say you got a family of 3 or whatever. Then what's 10,000 divided by 350? What is that, like $300? And let's say you got a family of 4. Most people can't even spend $1,000 a week. All right, and if I spent $10,000 a week, I would actually make all of the money back and then some. Legitimately, by the time I spent the money. And that would be if everything just goes okay for the next 2.5 months. I've taken a look at it. I understand that I make a massive amount of money in the cattle business. I make more money as a cattleman than anybody on the planet doing anything. And I have determined that the only reasonable thing for me to do with the money is to put it back into my business. That is what I have determined. I sat there and I thought about it, and that was effectively the only thing that I could come up with, because I thought about it and I was like, you know what, for me to spend this amount of money, I would have to go and buy myself 3 or 4 Lamborghinis every year. And I'm not going to do that. Why would I do that? I will put the money back into my business, okay? I'll put the money back into my business and then I'll figure it out. This weekend I will be selling cattle. I'll be selling 19 out of my 47 animals. When I have that money, I will effectively work on growing the size of my business. I will effectively work on expanding my balance sheet. That's the big idea. I'm not going to go and scrape any money off my business. I'm just going to grow my business with it. And if I feel like buying anything, I'll just put it on my credit card, all right? I'll just put it on my credit card and then I'll pay for it at the end of the month. And that's it for me today, all right?